Hey everyone, welcome back to this Saturday's Walk and Talk. Last week's Walk and Talk revolved around an appropriate time to introduce technology to your kids. And the message was pretty loud and clear that you shouldn't be introducing technology until your child has the ability to develop passions through curiosity and exploration, which comes from boredom. You shouldn't be introducing it until they've shown the ability to have multiple passions, multiple curiosities, because if you wait until then, technology is going to have to battle with that, with curiosity and exploration, and it won't win. It'll be tough, but kids will have those passions. Anyways, today I want to talk about you. I want to talk about us. I want to talk about parents and our cell phone use and how we're also becoming way too immersed into technology and how it's affecting kids, your kids. Now, one of the things that happens for a child when they're an infant and toddlers and so forth is that communication piece between parents and their kid. You know, there's something that's called serve and return. So basically, when you make a facial expression, your kid's going to mimic you or they're going to copy you. Or if you make sounds, your baby's going to try to make sounds. And what it does is it helps your kid develop those cognitive abilities to communicate and to think and to guess and to be creative, all of those wonderful things that are important to child development. So you can imagine what that looks like now when, as a parent, you're immersed in your phone and you're not interacting with your child. They're not seeing your facial expressions. They're not hearing your sounds. They're not hearing you articulate words. It means they're seeing a blank face. And just think what that will do to child development. There's no serve and return. And unfortunately, that has a massive impact on our kids. And everyone who's listening to this has been to a playground recently, has been to a restaurant. I was at an airport a few months back. It was the Kelowna airport. And I was watching these kids playing, and these kids were all toddlers. I can't remember how many parents it was, but every single parent was on their phone, not paying attention to their kid playing. And yes, they were busy, they were occupied and whatnot, but those kids kept looking for reinforcement from their parents. You know, the whole watch me thing. They weren't saying watch me, but just the glances, the looks. Those kids need to see your reaction. That's that serve and return piece. That's all important to child development. So as boring as it may be to sit there and watch your young child play, it's super important to their development. And if they don't get that, what do you think happens to them when they get to school? What do you think happens to them in terms of brain development? It's not developing the way it should. Now, I can tell you, I don't know how many elementary schools I've worked in now or been a principal at, not only from my own experience, but having conversations with other speech and language pathologists. We have seen a massive increase in the amount of kids who need speech and language intervention in kindergarten because kids are not able to articulate at the level they should at 4 and 5 years old. It's becoming a problem. We're seeing it because they haven't had any of that serve and return. They haven't had the interaction with their parents like they should because their parents have been on their phone way too much. When I was at the airport and I saw those parents on their phones, it wasn't a certain group of parents. It wasn't a specific demographic. It was everybody. You could tell that these parents came from all walks of life and they were all on their phones. You know, and what scares me, and I'm going to get into teenagers a bit later, what scares me now is that now that schools have taken cell phones away from kids at the high school level, elementary, they've always been gone, is that parents are going to probably think it's a free pass for them to be on their phones and for their kids to be on their phones, which is going to make communication disappear even more. The other thing that comes from kids having to compete for your attention with a screen is behavioral issues. All of a sudden, your child is having to compete with a screen. So what do you think is going to happen? They're going to compete. And I'm going to tell you right now, negative attention is just as good as positive attention. And what will happen is when they start having outbursts or they start having behavior that's more negative And oftentimes what comes that with is a parent turning around and reacting negatively, raising your voice, getting angry, being mad. And the kids then being confused because you're mad because you were on your phone. So the other thing you're doing is you're modeling that it's okay to yell and scream and to be on your phone, which in turn affects their relationships with their peers, whether it be with their siblings or their friends. They're going to think that it's okay to ignore. They're going to think it's okay to get angry. They're going to think it's okay to sit on their phone. They're going to think, oh, that's okay. So that's learned behavior. The other piece that comes out of this when you're on your phone too much is that there's no co-regulation. They have to figure out how to self-soothe and self-regulate on their own. And when they're little, not having co-regulation to learn how to self-soothe and self-regulate is hugely detrimental. And that's where things like anxiety and attachment disorders kind of start plopping into place because they don't have that co-regulation. I remember about 3 or 4 years back, I was at a football game, watching a 49ers game, and I try to go every year. This year I won't because I'm afraid I'll get thrown into one of those concentration camps. Anyways, at this game, I was sitting beside this couple, and they were young, and I was talking to the husband and stuff about football and whatnot, and they had their little baby there, which I thought was awesome, and the baby was doing great while they were watching the game. At some point, I think it was in the second half, the baby started getting colicky and was starting to cry and whatnot. So I thought right away, I'm like, okay, mom's gonna tuck baby in, bring him nice and close, have that body contact, do some rocking, and just soothing the baby, doing some co-regulation with the baby. But you know what she did instead? She had one of those little jumper things on and put the baby in this little jumper on the front of her chest, turned the baby around, and she held the cell phone in front of the baby's face to watch a show to self-soothe. That was the co-regulation. The technology, she used technology to co-regulate with her kids. Can you imagine the effects of using technology for co-regulation? At that age, you're teaching your kids that the only way they're going to soothe is through technology. After my last walk and talk where I was talking about when to introduce technology, that clearly was not the appropriate time to introduce it. So all of these things can go wrong. But here's the other piece to this, and this is the part that I see every single day in school. It's so obvious when you have kids that come in where their parents are immersed in technology or their child's immersed in technology because they don't have social skills. They have a really difficult time making friends. They have a difficult time with self-regulation. So oftentimes these are kids who may hit and push and not know how to use their words to communicate and solve problems. The other piece with these kids is oftentimes, besides having anxiety, they are desperate for attention. So they're very needy and they're clingy, and that's okay because as teachers, we step up and we act like their parent when we need to. But it's hard. And a lot of times you have kids who can't work through problems. They can't work through work. They have difficulty with conflict. And all of that because you're on your phone and you're not interacting and engaging with them. So it's a massive, massive problem. So let's step away from this whole notion about kids and technology and kids and social media. And let's look in the mirror and talk about us as parents and how our technology addiction and how social media impacts our ability to raise our children. We have to put our phones down. I remember a couple of years ago, I got in shit from my daughter because she said I was on my phone too much and I wasn't paying attention. That was a wake-up call because I feel like, as a parent, because I was on my phone dealing with work and I was just on my phone just for every kind of thing I could. And I assumed because she was a teenager, she didn't need my attention, but she made it clear she did. And I probably lost 6-8 months of a relationship with her, but she told me to get off my phone, and now I am. Whenever she's around, I make sure, or my son is around, I make sure I put my technology down because I want that interaction, especially as teenagers, because you never know when they're going to finally start talking to you. But all of that matters. How much we're on our phone matters, and it'll affect our kids greatly. So parents, I need you to do me a favor. I think it's Labor Day weekend and school starts on Tuesday. So put your phones down. Make sure that you're interacting with your kids and you're having a relationship with them and not your screen. And you know, parents, I don't mean to beat you up because like I said, I'm guilty. I still have moments where I should put my phone down and interact with my kids. But what I try to do is I try to be purposeful and I try to be cognizant of times when I shouldn't. Like when we're eating together. Or, you know what, honestly, as soon as my kids come into the room, I put my phone down because there's nothing more important than your child's development and their well-being. You know, so be intentional with it. If you're on your phone and your kid has some sort of an emotional outburst that's negative, that's a sign. That's not their fault, that's your fault. Because like I said earlier, any attention, whether it be negative or positive, is attention and they want that. So take it as a sign. If you're on your phone and your kids act up or if they break something or doing something because you're not paying attention, look in the mirror. That's your sign to put your phone down. And I know it's hard. These bloody things were designed to keep us addicted, not just kids, us as well. But at the end of the day, our relationships with our children are way more important than this stupid phone. And yes, they serve a purpose in our lives. And yes, our work is attached to it. And yes, our personal life is attached to it. There is nothing more important than our kids developing intellectually and socially. I do a lot of talks about emotional intelligence and developing those skills, developing grit and perseverance. And you know, we have kids not so they can raise themselves because we're on the phone. We have kids so we can raise them together and teach them independency. And there will come a time when they're going to be independent and they won't need you as much. But put your phone down. All right? Till next time. Peace out.